The gunshot rang out across the dusty main street of Copper Creek, silencing every soul who had gathered to witness the spectacle. Beatrice Keller lay sprawled in the dirt, her cheek already reddening from the harsh impact, her honey-blonde hair tumbling from its careful arrangement. Above her stood Clayton Rhodes, his face twisted with smug satisfaction, revolver still smoking in his hand after firing into the air. "That'll teach you to talk back to a man, you uppity little—" Clayton's words died in his throat as the tall figure stepped between them, his shadow falling across Beatrice's crumpled form. "She won't be needing any more lessons from you," said Mason Caldwell, his voice low but carrying across the hushed street. His hand hovered near the worn walnut grip of his Colt, eyes never leaving Clayton's face. "And you won't be laying another hand on her. Not today. Not ever again." The year was 1878, and in the Colorado Territory, men like Clayton Rhodes were accustomed to taking what they wanted. What they weren't accustomed to was someone standing in their way. Beatrice pushed herself up on one elbow, tasting blood where her lip had split against her teeth. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain as she watched the newcomer, a lean, weathered cowboy she'd never seen before, stand his ground against the man who'd been terrorizing her for months. "This ain't your business, stranger," Clayton snarled, but his gun hand trembled slightly. Even drunk, he recognized the steady, practiced stance of a man who'd drawn his weapon in earnest before. "I'm making it my business," Mason replied. "Now back away from the lady." The crowd that had gathered along the boardwalks shifted uncomfortably. Beatrice could hear the whispers starting already. How shameful for her father's daughter to be sprawled in the dirt like a common saloon girl. How inappropriate for her to have spoken so boldly to Clayton in the first place, refusing his advances yet again, this time in public where others could hear. But the cowboy, this Mason, didn't seem to care about propriety. He extended his hand toward her without taking his eyes off Clayton, who was slowly backing away. "You all right, miss?" he asked. Beatrice hesitated, then took the offered hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his grip gentle as he helped her to her feet. "I'm fine," she lied, brushing dirt from her skirts with as much dignity as she could muster. "Thank you for your assistance, but I could have handled—" "Sure you could," he interrupted, the ghost of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "But my ma taught me better than to stand by when a lady's in trouble." Clayton had retreated to the saloon, but his parting words hung in the air. "This ain't over, Caldwell." The cowboy turned his full attention to Beatrice now, and she found herself looking into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-browned face beneath a mop of dark hair badly in need of trimming. "Mason Caldwell," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Just passing through." "Beatrice Keller," she replied stiffly, aware of the watching eyes. "And I believe you've just made an enemy of the most powerful man in Copper Creek." Mason shrugged, unconcerned. "Wouldn't be the first time I've managed that particular achievement." "Can I escort you somewhere safe, Miss Keller?" Beatrice straightened her spine, ignoring the throbbing in her cheek. "I own the mercantile at the end of the street. I was just heading back when Mr. Rhodes intercepted me." She didn't add that Clayton had been drinking since noon, that he'd cornered her outside the telegraph office where she'd gone to send a message to a supplier, or that he'd grown increasingly insistent in his unwanted courtship since her father's death 6 months ago had left her alone to run the family business. Mason nodded and fell into step beside her, seemingly oblivious to the scandalized looks from the townsfolk. Beatrice was acutely aware of how this would appear, her walking with an unknown man moments after being knocked to the ground by another. The gossips would have a field day. "You're new to town," she observed, keeping her voice neutral. "Just rode in this morning," he confirmed. Looking for work, maybe, or just a place to rest a spell before moving on. And what kind of work does a man like you do, Mr. Caldwell? She asked, unable to keep a note of suspicion from her voice. Men who were handy with guns often had complicated pasts. His mouth quirked up at one corner. I've been a ranch hand, a horse trainer, even tried my hand at mining once. Wasn't much good at digging, though. They reached the Mercantile, a solid two-story building with Keller's General Goods painted in neat letters across the front. A bell jingled as Beatrice pushed open the door, grateful to escape the stares of passers-by. Inside, the store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and the sharp tang of pickles in barrels. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from sewing needles to shovels, while barrels of flour, sugar, and dried beans stood sentinel in the corners. Miss Keller. A young woman with copper-colored hair hurried forward from behind the counter, her eyes widening as she took in Beatrice's disheveled appearance. "What happened to you?" "Nothing to concern yourself with, Margaret," Beatrice said briskly, though she touched her cheek self-consciously. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Margaret Walsh, my assistant." Mason tipped his hat politely. "Madam." Margaret's curious gaze darted between them, clearly burning with questions she was too well-mannered to ask. "Could you fetch some ice for Miss Keller's face?" Mason asked in a tone that suggested it wasn't really a request. Margaret hesitated, looking to Beatrice for confirmation before hurrying to the back room when she received a small nod. "You should sit down," Mason said, pulling out a chair from behind the counter. "I should ask you to leave," Beatrice countered, though she sank gratefully onto the chair. "You've done enough damage already." His eyebrows rose. "Damage? Clayton Rhodes is not a man to cross lightly," she said, lowering her voice so Margaret wouldn't overhear. "He owns the bank, half the businesses in town, and has the sheriff in his pocket, and now he thinks I've allied myself with you." Mason leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed despite her warning. "I've met men like Rhodes before. They only understand one thing, that there's always someone faster, someone stronger, someone who isn't afraid of them. And that's you." Beatrice couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. He shrugged again. "For today, at least." Margaret returned with a cloth-wrapped bundle of ice, which Beatrice pressed gingerly to her throbbing cheek. "Will there be anything else, Miss Keller?" Margaret asked, her attention still more on the stranger than her employer. "No, thank you. You may go home early today, Margaret." The younger woman looked disappointed at missing whatever might unfold between her employer and the mysterious cowboy, but she collected her shawl and left with a final curious glance over her shoulder. When they were alone, Beatrice sighed heavily. "Mr. Caldwell, while I appreciate your intervention, I think it would be best if you moved on from Copper Creek as soon as possible. Clayton won't forget this slight, and I can't afford any more trouble." "Trouble seems to have found you already, Miss Keller," Mason observed quietly. "Has Rhodes been harassing you long?" Beatrice stiffened. "My personal affairs are none of your concern." "They became my concern when I stepped between you and his fist," Mason pointed out mildly. "And they'll be the whole town's concern if you don't have someone watching your back." "I don't need—" "Everyone needs someone watching their back in this world, Miss Keller," he interrupted. "Even stubborn, independent shopkeepers." Despite herself, Beatrice felt a smile tug at her mouth. "Is that what I am? Among other things, I'd wager." His blue eyes were warm with something that might have been admiration. "Brave, for one. Not many would stand up to a man like Rhodes." "Foolish, more likely," she murmured, wincing as she shifted the ice. "My father would say I never did know when to hold my tongue." Mason's expression softened. "Sometimes speaking up is the only way to keep your soul intact." The simple truth of those words struck Beatrice silent. She studied him more carefully now, the way he stood balanced on the balls of his feet, ready to move at a moment's notice. The faded scar that ran along his jawline, the quiet confidence that spoke of a man who had faced worse than Clayton Rhodes and lived to tell about it. "Why did you help me, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked finally. He seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because I've seen too many people get hurt when others stand by and do nothing." Something in his tone suggested personal experience, but Beatrice didn't press. Instead, she rose and moved behind the counter, replacing the melting ice bundle in a small basin. "Well, whatever your reasons, I do thank you," she said formally. "Now, was there something you needed from the mercantile, or were you simply playing knight-errant today?" Mason's mouth twitched. "Actually, I could use some supplies. Tobacco, if you have it, coffee, maybe some jerky for the trail." Beatrice began gathering the items, grateful for the return to business. This was familiar territory, safer than the strange feeling that fluttered in her chest when the cowboy looked at her too directly. "Will you really leave town?" she asked as she wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "Planning to," he said, counting out coins onto the counter. "But plans have a way of changing." "Not this one," she insisted. "Clayton has friends, Mr. Caldwell, men who won't hesitate to shoot you in the back if he gives the word." Mason pocketed his purchases with a rueful smile. "Your concern is touching, Miss Keller, but I can handle myself." "It's not concern," she said quickly. "I simply don't want another death on my conscience." His expression grew serious. "Has there been a first?" Beatrice turned away, busying herself with reorganizing items that needed no attention. "My father," she said quietly. "He stood up to Clayton over a loan. 3 days later he was found dead behind the saloon. The sheriff called it a robbery gone wrong, but you don't believe that." "I can't prove otherwise," she admitted. "But no, I don't." Mason was silent for so long that Beatrice finally turned back to face him. His expression had hardened, the easy charm replaced by something darker. "Miss Keller," he said finally, "I think I might stay in Copper Creek a bit longer after all." Before she could argue, the bell above the door jingled, and Sheriff Dawson stepped inside, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Heard there was some trouble earlier," the lawman drawled, his gaze sliding from Beatrice to Mason and back again. "Rhodes says this fella threatened him." "That's not what happened," Beatrice began, but Mason cut her off. "Miss Keller was knocked down," he said bluntly. "I suggested to Mr. Rhodes that wouldn't happen again." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That's so." He looked at Beatrice's bruised cheek. "Seems to me a lady ought to know better than to provoke a gentleman." "Is that the law in this town, Sheriff?" Mason asked, his tone dangerously mild. "That a man can strike a woman if he feels provoked," Sheriff Dawson flushed. "Now see here." "No, you see here," Mason interrupted. "Miss Keller was assaulted in broad daylight, and instead of arresting her attacker, you're in here giving her a lecture." The sheriff's hand tightened on his gun. "I don't know who you think you are, stranger, but he's my new hired hand," Beatrice blurted out, surprising herself as much as the two men. "Mr. Caldwell will be working for me, helping with deliveries and security." Mason recovered first, nodding as if this had been arranged long ago. "That's right. So if anyone has a problem with Miss Keller, they can take it up with me." Sheriff Dawson looked between them suspiciously. "Rhodes won't like this." "Mr. Rhodes doesn't have a say in who I employ," Beatrice said firmly. "Now, was there something you needed to purchase, Sheriff?" "Otherwise, we're closing for the day." After the lawman left, grumbling about women getting above themselves, Beatrice turned to Mason with a mix of embarrassment and defiance. "I don't know why I said that," she admitted. "But if you're determined to stay and make trouble, you might as well be useful while you're doing it." Mason's slow smile made her heart skip. "Yes, madam," he said. "I believe I could be very useful indeed. The job pays room and board plus $2 a week," she continued briskly, trying to sound businesslike. "There's a small apartment above the store where you can stay." "Where you stay, you mean," he observed. "Folks might talk." Beatrice lifted her chin. "Folks are already talking, Mr. Caldwell. At least this way I'll have some protection when Clayton decides to make good on his threats." Mason studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, Miss Keller, you've got yourself a hired hand." As Beatrice showed him to the small room at the back of the second floor, separated from her own quarters by a narrow hallway, she wondered what her father would think of her impulsive decision. James Keller had been a cautious man, methodical in business and in life. He would never have invited a stranger, especially one with such obvious familiarity with violence, into their home. But James Keller was dead, and his daughter was learning that caution alone wasn't enough to survive in Copper Creek. "It's not much," she apologized, gesturing to the sparse furnishings: a narrow bed, a washstand, a battered chest of drawers. "But it's clean." "I've slept in worse," Mason assured her, setting his saddlebags on the bed. "Much worse." Beatrice hesitated at the doorway, suddenly acutely aware that she'd invited a man she'd known for less than 2 hours to live under her roof. "Mr. Caldwell." He turned to her, reading her expression easily. "You're wondering if you've made a mistake trusting me." She didn't deny it. "I don't know anything about you." "What would you like to know?" The direct question caught her off guard. "Where are you from originally?" "Texas," he said. "Small ranch outside of San Antonio. My father raised horses." "And your family, are they still there?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, they're gone." The simple statement held too much pain for Beatrice to press further. "I'm sorry," she said instead. Mason shrugged, a gesture she was coming to recognize as his way of deflecting anything too personal. "It was a long time ago." He moved to the window, looking down at the street below. "Rhodes is across the way watching the store." Beatrice joined him at the window, careful to stay back from the glass. Sure enough, Clayton stood on the boardwalk outside the saloon, his gaze fixed on Keller's general goods. Even from this distance, she could see the dark fury on his face. "He won't give up easily," she warned. "Clayton believes he owns this town and everyone in it." "Men like that always fall the hardest," Mason said, his voice hard with certainty. Beatrice studied his profile, wondering what experiences had shaped that conviction. "You sound like you've seen it happen." He turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "Once or twice." The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, reminding Beatrice of the late hour. "I should let you get settled. Supper is at 6 in my kitchen through there." She gestured toward the door at the end of the hall. "We can discuss your duties afterward." As she turned to leave, Mason called after her softly, "Miss Keller." She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "He won't hurt you again," he promised, his blue eyes intense with conviction. "Not while I'm here." Beatrice nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried to her own room where she could sort through the tumultuous emotions of a day that had begun ordinarily enough and ended with her life utterly changed. At precisely 6 o'clock, Mason appeared in her kitchen doorway, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. His dark hair was still damp, and he'd trimmed his beard, revealing more of the strong line of his jaw. "Something smells good," he said, standing awkwardly until she gestured him to a chair at the small table. "Just a simple stew," Beatrice replied, setting out 2 bowls. "And biscuits. I'm not much of a cook, I'm afraid." "After weeks of my own campfire cooking, this is a feast," Mason assured her, waiting until she was seated before taking up his spoon. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Beatrice worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her all afternoon. "Mr. Caldwell, are you a gunfighter?" Mason set down his spoon carefully. "Not anymore." The answer surprised her. "But you were," he sighed, seeming to debate how much to tell her. "I was a Texas Ranger, Miss Keller, for 6 years. Then the war came, and afterward, things changed. I changed." Beatrice tried to reconcile this information with the man sitting across from her. "And now I'm a man trying to leave that life behind," he said simply. "Taking odd jobs, moving from town to town. Until you find what you're looking for," she guessed. His smile was sad. "Until I figure out what that even is." Beatrice understood that feeling all too well. Since her father's death, she'd been going through the motions of living, running the store, fending off Clayton's advances, but feeling adrift in a life she no longer recognized as her own. "Well," she said briskly, changing the subject, "about your duties here. The mercantile opens at 8. I'll need help with unpacking new shipments, organizing stock, making deliveries to some of our customers who live outside town." "And keeping roads at bay," Mason added. "Yes," she admitted. "Though I hope it won't come to violence." "So do I," he said, but his tone suggested he thought that outcome unlikely. After they'd cleared away the supper dishes, Beatrice showed Mason around the mercantile, explaining where things were kept and how the business operated. He listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that revealed a sharp mind behind those watchful eyes. "My father built this business from nothing," she told him as they stood in the main room of the store, now dark except for the single lamp she carried. "He came west with just $20 and a wagon full of goods he'd bartered for. Copper Creek was barely a settlement, then just a few miners, a saloon, and hope for a better future." "You love this place," Mason observed. "It's all I have left of him," she said simply. Mason nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. "Then we'll make sure you keep it." That night, Beatrice lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about in what had been her solitary domain for months. The floorboards creaked occasionally as Mason paced in his room. Once, she heard the metallic click of what might have been a gun being checked and loaded. Instead of frightening her, the sound was oddly comforting. For the first time since her father's death, she wasn't alone in facing whatever threats Copper Creek might hold. Morning brought a test of their new arrangement sooner than expected. Beatrice had just unlocked the front door of the mercantile when Clayton Rhodes strode in, flanked by 2 of his men, rough-looking cowboys who worked his ranch outside town. Well, Clayton drawled, his bloodshot eyes taking in Beatrice's still bruised face with no sign of remorse. "If it isn't the town's most stubborn shopkeeper, I hear you've taken in a stray." Beatrice straightened her spine. "Mr. Rhodes, if you're here to make a purchase, I'll be happy to assist you. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. We're not open quite yet." Clayton ignored her, sauntering further into the store, running his fingers along the countertop as if checking for dust. "You know, Beatrice, it's not safe for a woman alone in these parts. All sorts of unsavory characters passing through. I've only ever had your best interests at heart, offering to court you properly." "Is that what you call it?" Mason's voice came from the back of the store. He emerged from the storeroom, a crate of canned goods in his arms that he set down deliberately before facing Clayton. "Seemed more like harassment to me." Clayton's face darkened. "You're still here." "I work here now," Mason replied evenly. "Not for long," one of Clayton's men growled, his hand dropping to his gun. "Williams," Clayton cautioned, putting a hand on his companion's arm. His smile was all the more menacing for its false pleasantness. "No need for that, yet." He turned back to Beatrice. "I just came to deliver a message. The bank will be calling in your loan at the end of the month. Full amount due, Beatrice paled. That's impossible. The terms were clear small payments over 2 years. We've never missed one. Terms change, Clayton said with a shrug. Business is business. This isn't business, Mason cut in. It's extortion. Clayton's smile vanished. Watch your mouth, Cowboy. You're not in a position to be making accusations. And you're not in a position to be changing loan agreements on a whim, Mason countered. Unless banking practices have changed dramatically since I last checked. For a moment, tension crackled in the air, the threat of violence so palpable Beatrice could almost taste it. Then Clayton took a deliberate step backward. 1 month, he repeated, looking at Beatrice. And I suggest you find yourself a new hired hand by then. This one's bad for your health. He tipped his hat mockingly. Good day, Miss Keller. After they'd gone, Beatrice sank onto a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. He can't do this, she whispered. The store doesn't generate that kind of money all at once. He knows that. That's the point, Mason said grimly. He wants you desperate enough to accept his courtship to save your business. Never, Beatrice said fiercely. I'd burn this place to the ground first. Mason's expression softened at her vehemence. It won't come to that. How can you be so sure? She demanded. Because we have a month, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. A lot can happen in a month. The next few days fell into a pattern that began to feel almost natural. Mason proved himself handy around the store, quick to learn the inventory and surprisingly good with customers. The townspeople were wary of him at first, but his easy manner and obvious competence gradually won them over. Beatrice found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved efficiently as he stocked shelves. The genuine smile he offered to children who came into the store, the protective stance he took whenever Clayton or his men passed by on the street. They developed a comfortable routine, opening the store together in the morning, working side by side through the day, sharing simple meals in her kitchen at night. During those evening hours, they talked cautiously at first, then with increasing openness. Mason told her about his years as a ranger, tracking outlaws through the wildest parts of Texas. He spoke of comrades lost, of justice served and justice denied. He didn't mention what had made him leave that life, and Beatrice didn't ask, sensing it was still a wound too raw to probe. In turn, she shared stories of growing up in Copper Creek, of helping her father build the mercantile into a thriving business, of her dreams to expand someday, perhaps add a proper lending library for the town, something her schoolteacher mother would have appreciated. She died when I was 12, Beatrice explained one evening as they sat by the small stove in her parlor, the autumn chill having descended on the mountains early this year. Influenza. My father never really recovered from losing her, though he tried to hide it for my sake. It's hard to lose someone you love that much, Mason said quietly, staring into the flames. Changes a person. Is that what happened to you? She asked gently. He looked up, surprise flickering across his features as if he hadn't meant to reveal so much. After a long moment, he nodded. My wife and son. 5 years ago, Comanche raid while I was away on ranger business. Beatrice's heart clenched at the raw pain in his voice. I'm so sorry, Mason. It was the first time she'd used his given name, the formality between them dissolving in the face of such shared grief. He noticed, his eyes softening as they met hers. It was a long time ago, he said, echoing his words from their first day. But this time he continued. Sarah, my wife, she used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go. I think she was right about that. Beatrice reached across the space between their chairs and covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, the calluses on his palm a testament to a life of hard work. For a moment, they sat in silence, connected by touch and by the understanding that comes only from having walked through fire and survived, however scarred. The next morning, a telegram arrived for Mason. Beatrice tried not to watch too curiously as he read it, his expression giving nothing away. "Everything all right?" she asked when he folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Just some information I was waiting for," he said vaguely. "I may need to ride out for a day or two if that's acceptable." "Of course," she agreed, though the thought of facing Clayton without Mason's steadying presence made her stomach knot with anxiety. "Is it personal business?" His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "You could say that. I have a friend in Denver who's been looking into some matters for me." "Matters related to Clayton," she guessed. Mason hesitated, then nodded. "Men like Rhodes rarely build their empires honestly. If we can find evidence of wrongdoing, we might have leverage to stop him from calling in your loan." Hope flared in Beatrice's chest, quickly tempered by caution. "Be careful," she warned. "Clayton has friends in high places." "So do I," Mason assured her. "Or at least I used to." He left the next morning before dawn, promising to return in 2 days' time. Beatrice tried to focus on running the store, but the hours dragged without his presence. She hadn't realized how accustomed she'd grown to having him nearby, how much she'd come to depend not just on his protection but on his companionship. Margaret noticed her distraction. "You miss him," she observed as they closed up that evening. Beatrice busied herself with counting the day's receipts. "He's a good worker. The store runs more smoothly with his help." "Hum," Margaret hummed, unconvinced. "That's why you've been staring at the door every time the bell rings." "That will be all, Margaret," Beatrice said primly, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile at the younger woman's knowing look. That night, the store felt eerily quiet without Mason's presence. Beatrice double-checked all the locks before retiring to her room, where she slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of Clayton Rhodes breaking down the door, of her father's body lying in an alley, of Mason riding away and never returning. She woke to the sound of rain pattering against her window and the distant rumble of thunder. The day passed slowly, customers few due to the storm. By closing time, Beatrice was jumpy with nerves, starting at every noise. "I can stay if you'd like," Margaret offered. "Keep you company until Mr. Caldwell returns." "That's kind but unnecessary," Beatrice declined, though the offer was tempting. "The weather's turning worse. You should get home before dark." Alone again, Beatrice tried to occupy herself with bookkeeping, but her mind kept wandering to Mason. Where was he now? Had the storm caught him on the trail? Was he safe? The crash from downstairs jolted her from her worries. Someone was in the store. Heart pounding, Beatrice reached for the small revolver her father had insisted she learn to use. Quietly, she made her way to the top of the stairs, straining to hear over the thunder. Voices drifted up, more than one person, moving around in the darkened store below. She recognized Clayton's slurred speech immediately. "Should be here somewhere." Old Keller always kept it behind the counter. They were looking for something. The strong box, most likely, where she kept the store's cash and documents, including the loan agreement with the bank. Beatrice weighed her options. She could stay hidden and hope they left without coming upstairs. She could try to slip out the back way and run for help. Or she could confront them, gun in hand. None seemed likely to end well for her. The decision was made for her when heavy footsteps started up the stairs. Beatrice backed away, raising the revolver with shaking hands. The shadowy figure that appeared at the top of the stairs wasn't Clayton, but one of his ranch hands, the one called Williams. His eyes widened at the sight of her gun. "Well, look what we have here," he drawled. "The little shopkeeper's got teeth." "Get out," Beatrice ordered, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Get out now or I'll shoot." Williams laughed, the sound ugly in the darkness. No, you won't. You ain't got it in you to pull that trigger, girl. He took a step toward her. Beatrice cocked the hammer. Don't test me, she warned. Something in her tone must have convinced him she was serious because he stopped, raising his hands placatingly. Now, no need for that. We're just looking for something that belongs to Mr. Rhodes. You give it to us, we'll be on our way. Nothing here belongs to Clayton, Beatrice said, except the money he's stealing from honest folks through that bank of his. William's expression hardened. You'd best watch your mouth, Miss Keller. Rhodes don't like it when women talk back. So I've noticed, she said dryly. Now get out of my store. For a tense moment, they stood at an impasse, the only sounds the rain beating against the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. Then William smiled, a slow, menacing stretch of lips that made Beatrice's blood run cold. You can't stay awake forever, he said softly. And your pet cowboy ain't here to protect you now. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the darkness. That's where you're wrong. Mason stood at the bottom of the stairs, his revolver trained on William's back. He was soaked to the skin, his coat dark with rain, but his aim was steady. Drop your gun, he ordered. Nice and slow. Williams tensed, clearly calculating his chances. Then, with deliberate care, he removed his pistol from its holster and let it clatter to the floor. Now, tell your boss to come out where I can see him, Mason continued, his voice hard as iron. Rhodes is gone, Williams said quickly. Left after we got in, said he had other business. Mason's eyes flicked to Beatrice. You all right? She nodded, lowering her gun slightly but not putting it away. They were looking for something. The loan papers, Mason guessed. Evidence we might use against him. Williams said nothing, his face a mask of sullen defiance. Get downstairs, Mason ordered. Both of you. As they descended, Beatrice saw that another of Clayton's men was already sitting on the floor, hands tied behind his back. Mason must have subdued him before coming up to help her. What are you going to do with them? Beatrice asked as Mason efficiently disarmed and bound Williams. Take them to the sheriff, he replied grimly. Williams laughed. Dawson works for Rhodes, he won't hold us. We'll see about that, Mason said. He turned to Beatrice. Get your coat. We're going to pay a visit to the sheriff and then you're going to pack a bag. Pack, why? Because it's not safe for you here anymore, Mason explained. And because I found what we need in Denver. Evidence of Rhodes' criminal activities enough to bring him down. But we need to get it to the federal marshal in Silver Creek. Beatrice's mind raced. That's 2 days' ride from here. Yes, Mason confirmed. And we're leaving tonight. An hour later they stood in Sheriff Dawson's office, the two captive men glowering from the jail cell while Mason laid out the situation in blunt terms. Breaking and entering, he enumerated. Attempted robbery. Threatening a woman with violence, all on behalf of Clayton Rhodes, who I'm told is a respected citizen of this community. Sheriff Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Rhodes says Miss Keller has something that belongs to him. A misunderstanding is all. A misunderstanding that required breaking into her store in the middle of the night. Mason's voice dripped with skepticism. I may be new in town, Sheriff, but I'm not a fool. Rhodes is using his influence to intimidate Miss Keller, and you're allowing it. The sheriff flushed. Now see here. No, you see here, Mason interrupted, pulling a folded document from inside his coat. This is a telegram from Federal Marshal James Wilson. He's very interested in Clayton Rhodes' banking practices, particularly his habit of changing loan terms to force foreclosures on properties he wants to acquire. Dawson paled visibly. I don't know anything about that. Don't you? Mason challenged. Because it seems awfully convenient that you've never investigated any complaints against Rhodes, despite his pattern of intimidation. The sheriff's eyes darted between Mason and the cell where Clayton's men waited. What do you want from me? Keep these men locked up until we return, Mason said. And if Rhodes comes looking for us, you don't know where we've gone. He won't like that, Dawson muttered. He'll like a federal investigation even less, Mason countered. Your choice, Sheriff. Start doing your job, or go down with Rhodes when he falls. Back at the Mercantile, Beatrice hastily packed a small valise while Mason saddled his horse and borrowed another from the livery for her. We'll leave through the back alley, he told her when she came downstairs. Rhodes has men watching the front of the store. Margaret, Beatrice said suddenly. I need to let her know I've already sent word, Mason assured her. She'll open the store tomorrow and say you've gone to visit a supplier. Beatrice nodded, impressed by his thoroughness. You've thought of everything. Not everything, he admitted, but enough to keep us alive, I hope. They slipped out into the rainy night, mounted their horses, and left Copper Creek by the back trails Mason had scouted earlier. The storm provided cover, masking the sound of their departure and washing away tracks that might have been followed. As the lights of the town disappeared behind them, Beatrice felt a curious mixture of fear and exhilaration. She'd never done anything so reckless in her life, fleeing in the night with a man she'd known less than 2 weeks, abandoning the business her father had built, putting her fate in Mason's capable but still largely unknown hands. And yet, there was a rightness to it that she couldn't deny. A sense that, for the first time since her father's death, she was truly living rather than merely surviving. They rode through the night, stopping only when the rain became too heavy to see through. Mason found them shelter in an abandoned line shack, its roof mostly intact, its walls offering protection from the wind that had picked up as the storm intensified. Inside, he quickly built a small fire in the crude stone fireplace, the blaze casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Beatrice huddled close, her clothes damp despite the oilskin coat Mason had insisted she wear. Here, he said, draping his own coat over her shoulders. You're shivering. What about you? She protested. He smiled, the firelight highlighting the planes of his face in amber and gold. I've endured worse. That seemed to be his answer to many things Beatrice had noticed. I've endured worse, as if past suffering somehow negated present discomfort. Mason, she began hesitantly, what happens after we reach the marshal, after Rhodes is dealt with? He busied himself with unpacking their meager supplies: jerky, hard biscuits, a flask of coffee. You go back to your life, your store, the future you planned. And you, she pressed. He shrugged, that familiar deflection. Move on, I suppose, find another town, another odd job. Is that what you want? Mason looked up, surprise evident in his eyes, as if the question had never occurred to him. What I want hasn't mattered for a long time, Beatrice. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. It matters to me, she said quietly. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then he sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. What I want, he said slowly, is to find a place where the past doesn't follow me, where I can wake up in the morning and not feel the weight of all I've lost, all I've done, where I can be just a man. Not a ranger, not a widower, not a gun for hire, just Mason. The vulnerability in his confession caught at Beatrice's heart. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and took his hand in hers. Maybe Copper Creek could be that place, she suggested softly. Once Rhodes is gone. Mason's fingers tightened around hers. Beatrice, he began, his voice rough with emotion, I'm not the man you think I am. I've done things, we've all done things, she interrupted. Made choices we regret. That doesn't define who we are now, who we can become. The fire crackled between them, sparks flying upward as a log settled. Outside, the rain continued to fall, a steady percussion on the cabin's roof. When my father died, Beatrice continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I thought my life was over. Everything I'd planned, everything I'd hoped for, seemed to die with him. I was just existing until you walked into my store and reminded me what it feels like to fight for something. Mason's blue eyes were dark with emotion as they searched her face. And what are you fighting for, Beatrice Keller? A future, she said simply. One where I don't have to be afraid, where I can build something that's truly mine, not just what my father left behind. And you think I could be part of that future? His voice was incredulous, as if the very idea was beyond imagining. I think, she said carefully, that when you stepped between me and Clayton that day, something changed for both of us, and I'm not ready to let that go. Mason's gaze dropped to their joined hands, his thumb tracing slow circles on her skin. Neither am I, he admitted finally. The confession hung in the air between them, delicate as a soap bubble. Neither moved to close the distance, both aware of the precipice they stood on, the irreversibility of what might come next. It was the sudden gust of wind down the chimney, sending sparks flying dangerously close to their bedrolls, that broke the moment. Mason pulled away to tend the fire, and Beatrice busied herself with arranging their meager provisions for the morning. But something had shifted between them. A door opened that could not be closed again. As they settled into their separate bedrolls, the fire burning low between them, Beatrice felt a curious certainty take root in her heart. Whatever happened with Clayton Rhodes, whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Mason had found something in each other worth fighting for. Dawn broke clear after the storm, the world washed clean and gleaming with droplets that caught the early light like scattered diamonds. They set out as soon as it was light enough to see the trail, Mason leading the way through terrain he seemed to know instinctively. How did you find the evidence against Rhodes? Beatrice asked as they rode side by side along a ridge overlooking a valley painted in autumn colors. An old ranger friend who works for the Treasury Department now, Mason explained. He's been tracking banking irregularities across the territory. Rhodes' name came up more than once. And you contacted him as soon as you arrived in Copper Creek, Mason nodded. I recognized the type. Men like Rhodes operate the same way everywhere, using money and fear to control people. Like your wife and son, Beatrice said softly, understanding dawning. It wasn't really Comanches, was it? Mason's face hardened. It was a man like Rhodes, a cattle baron in the Panhandle who wanted our land. When I wouldn't sell, he hired men to frighten us off. I was away tracking a gang of horse thieves when they came. They only meant to scare Sarah, they said later, but she fought back and... His voice trailed off, the memory too painful to articulate. And that's why you left the Rangers, Beatrice guessed. After I hunted down the men responsible, Mason confirmed, his tone flat. The Baron had connections, political influence. He walked free while I was discharged for excessive force in apprehending his hired guns. Beatrice's heart ached for him, for the injustice he'd suffered, for the family he'd lost. I'm so sorry, Mason, he shook his head. It was a long time ago, but when I saw Rhodes knock you down, heard the sheriff dismiss it, something in me couldn't walk away, not again. They rode in contemplative silence for a time, each lost in thought. Then Beatrice spoke again, her voice determined. We won't let Rhodes win, not this time. Mason looked over at her, admiration clear in his gaze. No, he agreed, not this time. By mid-afternoon, they'd covered enough ground that Mason felt safe making camp near a small stream. While Beatrice gathered firewood, he checked their back trail, ensuring they weren't being followed. All clear, he reported when he returned. If Rhodes sent men after us, they took a different route. Or the sheriff actually did his job for once, Beatrice suggested, arranging kindling for the fire. Mason smiled wryly. Let's not count on miracles. As they sat by the fire that evening, sharing a simple meal of jerky softened in hot water with the last of their biscuits, Beatrice found herself studying Mason's face in the flickering light. The hard lines were still there, the scar along his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows that spoke of habitual watchfulness, but there was a softness too, especially when he looked at her. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. Beatrice blushed, embarrassed to be caught staring. "I was just thinking how different you seem out here, away from town." "Different how?" "More at ease," she explained. "As if you belong out in the wild more than behind a counter." He chuckled, the sound warming her more than the fire. "Can't argue with that." "Though I was getting better at measuring out sugar and flour." "You were," she agreed with a smile. "Another week and I might have trusted you with the ledger." "High praise indeed," he teased, then grew more serious. "But you're right. I've spent most of my life outdoors, first on my father's ranch, then with the rangers. Four walls start to feel like a cage after a while." "Is that why you never settled down again? After Sarah?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider its boldness. Mason was quiet for so long that Beatrice thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, reflective. "Partly, but mostly I didn't think I deserved it. A home, peace, after the things I'd done. The men who killed your family," he nodded once. "I told myself it was justice." "Maybe it was, but there's a line between justice and vengeance, and I'm not sure which side I ended up on." Beatrice considered his words carefully. "I think," she said finally, "that sometimes the line isn't as clear as we'd like it to be, and that we can spend so much time looking backward at our mistakes that we miss the chance to move forward." Mason's eyes met hers across the fire, a flicker of hope visible in their depths. "Is that what you're doing, Beatrice? Moving forward?" "Trying to," she admitted. "It's not easy." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Again, that moment from the night before returned the sense of standing on a precipice, of something profound and irrevocable awaiting them if they dared to take the next step. This time, it was Mason who bridged the gap. He rose from his place by the fire and moved to sit beside her on the fallen log she'd been using as a seat. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to her face, his calloused fingertips gentle as they traced the fading bruise on her cheek. "When I saw him hit you," Mason said softly, "I wanted to kill him, right there in the street." "Why didn't you?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I saw something in your eyes, not fear, defiance, strength. And I knew you deserved better than more violence in your name." His hand slid to cup her cheek, and Beatrice leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of the gesture. "Mason," she murmured, her heart racing. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell me I'm wrong to think you might feel something for me too." Instead of answering, Beatrice closed the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started tentatively, but quickly deepened as Mason's arms encircled her, drawing her against his chest. The world narrowed to just this moment. Just this man, the warmth of him, the strength in his embrace, the way he kissed her as if she were something precious and rare. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice felt as if something fundamental had shifted within her, some barrier crumbling that she hadn't even known existed. "I've wanted to do that since the first day," Mason confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "Standing in your store, watching you straighten your spine and face down roads even with a bruised face. You were the bravest thing I'd ever seen." Beatrice laughed softly. "I was terrified." "That's what makes it brave," he said, pressing another gentle kiss to her lips. Doing what needs doing, even when you're afraid. They sat entwined by the fire as darkness fell completely, talking in low voices about small things, important things, the future they might build if they dared to believe in it. When the chill of the night finally drove them to their bedrolls, Mason stretched his beside hers, drawing her close beneath the shared warmth of their blankets. Nothing more happened between them that night beyond kisses and whispered words, both aware of the journey still ahead and the dangers that might await. But as Beatrice drifted to sleep in the circle of Mason's arms, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that she hadn't experienced since long before her father's death. The next day dawned clear and cold, frost silvering the grass around their campsite. They set out early, Mason estimating they would reach Silver Creek by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. "And then what?" Beatrice asked as they rode through a stand of aspen trees, their golden leaves shimmering in the morning light. "We present our evidence to Marshal Wilson," Mason explained. "He'll wire for authorization to investigate the bank, possibly arrest Rhodes if the evidence is strong enough. And if it's not," the possibility had been nagging at her since they'd fled Copper Creek. Mason's expression was grim but determined. "Then we find more evidence. Rhodes has been operating this way for years, according to my friend at the Treasury. There will be a trail if we look hard enough." "We might not be able to return to Copper Creek," Beatrice said quietly, the reality of their situation sinking in. "If Rhodes remains free, it won't be safe." "No," Mason agreed, "but there are other towns, other opportunities." He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "If it comes to that, would you be willing to start over somewhere new?" The question carried weight beyond its immediate concern. It was about more than just relocating her business. It was about whether she could envision a future with him, away from everything familiar. "Yes," she said simply, surprising herself with how easily the answer came. "I think I would." Mason's smile was worth every uncertainty the future might hold. They were within an hour's ride of Silver Creek when disaster struck. The trail narrowed as it wound through a rocky pass, forcing them to ride single file. Mason went first, scanning for any sign of danger. They were halfway through when the shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. Mason's horse reared in panic as the bullet struck the rock face inches from its head. Mason managed to control the animal, drawing his gun in the same motion and shouting for Beatrice to take cover. She urged her own horse into the shelter of a large boulder, heart pounding as more shots rang out. Mason fired back, his aim directed at a ledge some 50 feet up, where a puff of gun smoke betrayed the shooter's position. "Stay down," he called to her, dismounting and using his horse as partial cover while he continued to return fire. Beatrice pressed herself against the cold stone, her breath coming in short gasps. This was real, she realized with stark clarity. Someone was trying to kill them to kill Mason, and it could only be Clayton's men, sent to stop them from reaching the marshal. The gunfire exchange continued for what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a minute. Then there was a cry from above, and the shooting stopped. Mason held his position, gun trained on the ledge, waiting. "I think I got him," he said finally, though he didn't lower his weapon. But there might be others. As if in answer to his caution, horses appeared at the far end of the pass, 3 riders, approaching fast. Beatrice recognized Williams among them, his face twisted with fury even at this distance. "Mason," she cried in warning. He saw them too, his expression hardening. "Get on your horse," he ordered. "When I start firing, ride for the end of the pass. Don't stop no matter what." "I'm not leaving you," she protested. "Beatrice." His voice was urgent now. "The evidence is in your saddlebag." It has to reach the marshal, or none of this matters. She hesitated, torn between the logic of his argument and the fear of abandoning him to face 3 armed men alone. "Go," he insisted, already raising his gun to provide covering fire. "I'll be right behind you." The approaching riders were close enough now that Beatrice could hear Williams shouting orders to the others. With a last desperate look at Mason, she swung onto her horse and urged it forward as he began firing, forcing Clayton's men to scatter for cover. The next moments were a blur of terror and determination. Beatrice bent low over her horse's neck, focusing only on reaching the end of the pass, on delivering the evidence that would bring Clayton to justice. Bullets whined past her, too close for comfort, but she didn't slow. Breaking free of the pass, she found herself on a downhill slope leading toward a valley. Silver Creek would be visible soon, just over the next ridge. Safety was within reach, but Mason wasn't behind her. Beatrice reined in her horse, turning back toward the pass. The gunfire had stopped, an ominous silence falling over the landscape. She waited, breath held, for any sign of movement. Long seconds ticked by. A minute. 2. Just as despair began to well up in her chest, a horse emerged from the pass. Mason's horse, with him slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side where a dark stain spread across his shirt. "Mason," Beatrice cried, urging her horse back up the slope to meet him. "Told you I'd be right behind you," he managed, his face pale beneath its tan. "Williams is dead. The others ran." "You're hurt," she said, reaching out to steady him as he swayed in the saddle. "Just a graze," he assured her, though the grimace that accompanied the words belied his casual tone. "Nothing that can't wait until we reach town." Beatrice wasn't convinced, but she knew he was right about the need to press on. Clayton's remaining men might regroup, or others might be searching for them. They needed to reach the marshal before anything else went wrong. They rode side by side down into the valley, Beatrice watching Mason anxiously. His jaw was set against pain, his breathing becoming more labored as they continued. By the time the buildings of Silver Creek came into view, he was listing dangerously in the saddle. "Just a little further," she encouraged, reaching over to grip his arm. "Hold on, Mason, please." The marshal's office stood at the main intersection of Silver Creek, a solid brick building with the Federal Star displayed prominently beside the door. Beatrice helped Mason dismount, supporting him as they staggered up the steps and inside. The man behind the desk rose immediately, taking in Mason's bloody shirt and Beatrice's disheveled appearance. "What in tarnation, Marshal Wilson?" Mason asked, his voice strained. "Caldwell. Texas Rangers retired. We spoke by telegram." Recognition dawned on the lawman's face. "Caldwell, yes. What happened to you, Clayton Road's men?" Beatrice explained quickly as she helped Mason to a chair. "They ambushed us on the trail. The evidence is in my saddlebag." While the marshal dispatched his deputy to retrieve the documents and summon the town doctor, Beatrice knelt beside Mason, pressing a clean handkerchief to his wound. "So much for just a graze," she scolded gently, fear making her voice sharper than she intended. Mason managed a weak smile. "Might have downplayed it a bit. You might have bled to death," she countered, blinking back tears. He reached up to touch her face, his fingers leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Couldn't let that happen," he murmured. "Not when I've just found a reason to live again." Before Beatrice could respond, the doctor arrived, and she was ushered aside while Mason was examined and treated. Marshal Wilson, meanwhile, was reviewing the documents they'd brought, his expression growing increasingly grave. "This is serious," he told Beatrice. "Bank fraud, illegal foreclosures, possibly murder if what you say about your father's death is true. I'll wire the district attorney immediately." "Will it be enough?" she asked anxiously. "To stop him," More than enough, Wilson assured her. Rhodes won't be threatening anyone else after this. Relief washed over Beatrice, momentarily overwhelming even her concern for Mason. It was over. Clayton's reign of terror in Copper Creek was finished. Her father would have justice at last. The doctor completed his work, bandaging Mason's side and administering laudanum for the pain. The bullet passed clean through, he reported. Missed anything vital, but he's lost a fair amount of blood. He'll need rest, proper care. I'll take care of him, Beatrice promised without hesitation. Later, installed in the town's small hotel, Mason rested on the bed while Beatrice sat vigil beside him. The marshal had arranged for guards outside their door until Clayton could be apprehended, assuring them of their safety. You should sleep, Mason told her, his words slightly slurred from the medication. You're exhausted. So are you, she countered, but she smiled as she said it, smoothing the hair back from his forehead. Beatrice, he began, catching her hand in his, what I said earlier. About finding a reason to live again, he nodded, his blue eyes serious despite the drug-induced haze. I meant it. These past weeks with you, they've changed me, changed everything. Beatrice's heart swelled with emotion. They've changed me too, she admitted. I didn't realize how much I'd given up, how much I'd stopped hoping for, until you came into my life. I know we haven't known each other long, Mason continued, his grip on her hand tightening. And I have nothing to offer you except a complicated past and an uncertain future. But if you're willing to take that chance, I am, Beatrice said softly, bending to press her lips to his. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. 3 days later, a telegram arrived from Copper Creek. Marshal Wilson had coordinated with authorities there, and Clayton Rhodes was in custody, along with several of his associates. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with more being uncovered as investigators examined the bank's records. You can go home, the marshal told Beatrice and Mason as they sat in his office. Rhodes will stand trial in Denver. From what we've found so far, he'll be in prison for years, possibly the rest of his life. Home, Beatrice repeated, the word carrying new meaning now. She looked at Mason, who was still pale but recovering well. What do you think? He considered the question carefully. Copper Creek has its appeal, he admitted. Good people, for the most part. A thriving mercantile in need of a manager who can measure sugar and flour with reasonable accuracy. Beatrice laughed, her heart lighter than it had been in months. And the manager's assistant, what would his duties include exactly? Mason's slow smile sent warmth spreading through her. I imagine they'd be quite comprehensive, he said, his voice low enough that the marshal tactfully pretended not to hear. Security, deliveries, keeping the owner happy. That last one sounds particularly important, Beatrice agreed, unable to keep the smile from her face. They returned to Copper Creek a week later, arriving to find the town transformed. With Clayton's grip broken, people moved more freely, spoke more openly. Sheriff Dawson had resigned, replaced temporarily by a deputy from Silver Creek, until elections could be held. Margaret welcomed Beatrice back with tears and a fierce hug. I knew you'd come back, she said. And I knew Mr. Caldwell would take care of you. We took care of each other, Beatrice corrected gently, exchanging a warm glance with Mason. The mercantile had been well maintained in her absence, thanks to Margaret's diligence. As Beatrice walked through the familiar aisles, checking inventory and greeting customers who came in to welcome her home, she felt a sense of rightness, of belonging that had been missing before. That evening, after closing the store, she and Mason sat in her small parlor, discussing the future over cups of coffee. The bank will be under new management soon, Mason told her, having spent part of the day gathering information around town. A federal receiver for now until a permanent replacement can be found. What about the loan? Beatrice asked. It had been the catalyst for their flight after all. Reinstated on the original terms, he assured her. Marshall Wilson made sure of that. Your business is safe. Beatrice nodded, relieved but also thoughtful. And what about you, Mason? Are you still planning to move on when the dust settles? He set down his cup, his expression serious as he reached for her hands. I think I've done enough moving on to last a lifetime, he said. If you'll have me, Beatrice, I'd like to stay. Here with you. Joy bloomed in her chest, so intense it was almost painful. As my hired hand, she teased, though her voice trembled slightly. Mason's smile was tender as he lifted her hands to his lips. As whatever you want me to be, he said. Partner, protector, husband someday if you'll have me. Beatrice's breath caught at the last word at the future it implied. Husband, she repeated softly, testing the sound of it. I think I'd like that, Mason Caldwell, very much. His kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise of all that might come. When he pulled back, his blue eyes were alight with a happiness Beatrice had never seen there before. I love you, Beatrice Keller, he said simply. I think I have since the moment I saw you stand up to Rhodes, refusing to stay down even after he'd knocked you to the ground. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both momentous and entirely natural. And I'm very glad you decided to interfere in what wasn't your business. Mason laughed, pulling her into his arms. Best decision I ever made, he said against her hair. Though I believe you're the one who interfered in the end, offering me a job I didn't ask for. Seemed like the practical solution at the time, she said, smiling against his chest. Practical, he agreed, and life-changing. 6 months later, Beatrice stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress she'd chosen for her wedding day. Margaret fussed with the flowers in her hair, wildflowers Mason had picked that morning before being shooed away to prepare himself. You look beautiful, Miss Keller, Margaret said, stepping back to admire her work. Mr. Caldwell won't know what hit him. Beatrice smiled, a flutter of nerves and excitement in her stomach. I hope you're right. The mercantile had thrived in the months since Clayton's arrest, with Mason proving himself not just a capable assistant but an innovative business partner. He'd suggested expanding their inventory to include more ranching supplies, recognizing a gap in the market now that Clayton's store no longer held a monopoly on such items. They'd renovated the upstairs living quarters too, turning the small, separate rooms into a proper home they would share after today's ceremony. Mason had done most of the work himself, revealing yet another talent Beatrice hadn't known he possessed. My father built our house in Texas, he'd explained when she'd commented on his carpentry skills. Made me help from the time I was old enough to hold a hammer, said a man should know how to build a home for his family. A home for their family. The words had warmed Beatrice then, just as the thought of it warmed her now as she prepared to become Mason's wife. The ceremony was held in the town's small church, filled to capacity with townsfolk who had come to respect both Beatrice and the former ranger who'd helped bring down Clayton Rhodes. Marshall Wilson had made the journey from Silver Creek to stand as Mason's best man, while Margaret served as Beatrice's maid of honor. When Mason saw Beatrice walking toward him down the aisle, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. He took her hands in his as she reached him, his voice steady but thick with emotion as he repeated his vows. I, Mason Caldwell, take you, Beatrice Keller, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he promised. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. Beatrice's own vows were heartfelt, her voice clear despite the tears that threatened. I, Beatrice Keller, take you, Mason Caldwell, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. The kiss that sealed their union was sweet and reverent, a promise before God and the community that they had chosen each other for all the days to come. At the celebration afterward, held in the town square under a canopy of lanterns as the sun set over the mountains, Marshall Wilson raised a toast to the newlyweds. "To Mason and Beatrice Caldwell," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "Two of the bravest people I've had the privilege to know. May your life together be as full of love and courage as your journey to find each other." Mason pulled Beatrice close as the crowd echoed the toast, his arm secure around her waist. "Happy," he murmured against her temple. "Completely," she assured him, turning in his embrace to meet his gaze. "And you?" His smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "More than I ever thought possible." As they moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Beatrice caught sight of the spot on Main Street where she had fallen that day, where Mason had stepped between her and Clayton, changing both their lives irrevocably. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, noticing her distraction. "That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones," she replied, squeezing his hand. "If Clayton hadn't knocked me down that day, I still would have found you," Mason said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not as dramatically, but I believe we were meant to find each other, Beatrice." She leaned into him, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. "I believe that too." Later, as the celebration wound down and they prepared to return to their newly renovated home, Margaret approached with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A wedding gift," she explained, "from all of us at the store." Inside was a hand-carved plaque, the words burned into the wood in elegant script. "Caldwell's General Mercantile ESD, 1878. We thought you might want to make it official," Margaret said, smiling at their surprised expressions. Beatrice looked at Mason, a question in her eyes. They discussed eventually changing the store's name, but she hadn't wanted to suggest it too soon, knowing how much her father's legacy meant to her. "What do you think?" she asked. "Caldwell's has a nice ring to it." Mason's fingers traced the carved letters, his expression thoughtful. "What about Keller and Caldwell's?" he suggested, honoring the past while embracing the future. Beatrice's heart swelled with love for this man who understood her so well. "Perfect," she agreed. They hung the modified sign the following week, its fresh paint gleaming in the sunlight as customers old and new came to shop and to congratulate the newlyweds. The store, like its owners, had been given a second chance, a new beginning. As the months passed, Beatrice and Mason settled into married life with a contentment that only deepened with time. They worked side by side in the mercantile, expanded their inventory, and became respected fixtures in the community. Mason's past as a ranger occasionally proved useful when trouble arose, but more often it was his fairness and quiet strength that earned him the town's respect. Beatrice, meanwhile, started the lending library she'd always dreamed of, using a corner of the store to house books that customers could borrow for a small fee. She also began teaching reading to some of the town's children, whose families couldn't afford regular schooling, finding a new purpose that honored her mother's memory. A year after their wedding, on a crisp autumn evening much like the one when Mason had first arrived in Copper Creek, Beatrice waited for him in their living room, a special supper prepared and a particular piece of news burning to be shared. When he came in, hanging his hat by the door and bending to kiss her in greeting, she could barely contain her excitement. "What is it?" he asked, noticing her barely suppressed smile. "You look like you're about to burst." "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hands and drawing him to sit beside her on the sofa. "Something wonderful." Mason's expression grew serious, a hint of worry in his eyes. "What is it, love?" Beatrice placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. "In the spring." For a moment Mason simply stared at her, disbelief and hope warring on his face. Then joy broke through, pure and radiant, as he gathered her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, pulling back to look into her eyes, his own suspiciously bright. "Beatrice, I never thought I'd have this chance again, a family, a future, a life filled with love instead of regret." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the dampness on his cheeks that matched her own tears. "You've given me the same gift," she told him, "a second chance at happiness." As Mason's lips met hers in a tender kiss, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a moment of violence on a dusty street to this quiet celebration of new life. Clayton Rhodes was long gone, serving his sentence in a Denver prison, but the ripples of his actions had led, improbably, to the greatest joy Beatrice had ever known. She was knocked down for talking back, Mason had once said to a crowd of onlookers, his voice a promise of protection. He won't do it again. And he hadn't. Instead, Mason Caldwell had helped Beatrice Keller rise not just from the dirt of Main Street, but to a life fuller and richer than she'd ever imagined possible. Together, they'd found the strength to confront the past, the courage to embrace the present, and the hope to build a future where love, not fear, was the foundation of everything they did. As the baby grew within her, as their business thrived, as their home filled with laughter and plans for the future, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that sometimes falling down was just the beginning of learning how to truly stand tall. And with Mason by her side, she would never fall again.